You are there calling his name 1, 2, 3 times. He listens. You know he listens because his ears move slightly in your direction. But he doesn't come, he doesn't look. He remains fixed on that empty spot on the wall, as if something of extreme importance were happening there. Something you can't see, you can't hear, you can't feel. You think he's ignoring you, that he's cold, indifferent. Typical feline behavior, they say. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if he's not ignoring you, just listening to something you've lost the ability to perceive? Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic who found God in the deepest silences, taught that the eye through which God sees me is the same eye through which I see God. For him, reality had layers, and whoever developed enough sensitivity could access dimensions that remained invisible to most. Your cat possesses this sensitivity. When he stops in the middle of the hallway and stares into the air, he's not being weird. He's doing what Eckhart called pure contemplation, total attention directed at what is, without filters, without interpretations, without the human need to name and categorize each experience. There is something in your cat's silence that disturbs you deeply. The way he simply is, present, attentive, but not to you, to something greater. Something that pulsates in the environment but that you can't identify. He's not being antisocial, he's being sensory, picking up frequencies that your agitated mind can no longer register. The greatest noise, wrote Eckhart, comes from those who do not know how to listen. You speak, call, make sounds to attract attention. Your cat listens to everything. Your words, your anxiety, your need for connection. But he also listens to what you don't say, what vibrates underneath, what your soul whispers while your mouth screams. He doesn't reject you when he doesn't respond to your call. He just knows that there are deeper layers of communication happening, frequencies that don't pass through verbal language, messages that arrive through silence, through gaze, through pure presence. Maybe your cat isn't indifferent. Maybe it's the opposite, so sensitive that he needs to process the invisible before he can deal with the obvious. So connected to what is not seen that he sometimes disconnects from what is seen, not out of coldness, but out of perceptive overload. Eckhart discovered that God speaks more clearly in silence than in words, and your cat instinctively inhabits this silence, lives in this deep listening. He is a furry monk, practicing active contemplation, while you interpret it as negligence. Meister Eckhart was condemned by the Church not for doctrinal heresy, but for something much more dangerous, teaching that access to the divine did not depend on intermediaries, rituals, or sacred words. It depended only on the ability to listen to the silence that vibrates behind every sound. God speaks best when nothing is said, he proclaimed to the inquisitors who tried to silence him. This understanding placed Eckhart in mystical territory that institutionalized religion feared, the recognition that the experience of the sacred was, fundamentally, an experience of pure presence, not of concepts about presence, but of presence itself, revealing itself through disarmed attention. Your cat naturally lives in this state that Eckhart took decades to cultivate. When he sits motionless for hours, looking at what seems to be nothing, he is practicing what the German mystic called active detachment, the ability to be completely present without clinging to any specific object of attention. The man who lives in time, wrote Eckhart, cannot hear eternity. Your cat does not live in human psychological time. He doesn't anticipate the future. He doesn't ruminate on the past. He exists in a present so broad that he can register dimensions of reality that the temporal mind blocks for self-protection. The archetypal wound that Eckhart identified in the human condition was spiritual deafness, the inability to listen to what is always being communicated beneath the surface of common experience. We have developed, through socialization, perceptual filters that allow us to function in society, but that also disconnect us from more subtle layers of reality. Your cat has not developed these filters. or has developed them differently. When you call his name and he doesn't answer, it may be because he is listening to something much more urgent. The vibration of your anxiety, the echo of your loneliness, the inaudible sound of your soul trying to say something that your mouth cannot articulate. Eckhart observed that animals, especially those who lived close to humans, functioned as mirrors of the soul, reflecting not what we said, but what we emanated energetically. The horse feels the rider's fear before the rider knows he is afraid, he noted in his private reflections. Applied to cats, this means that when your feline walks away at the exact moment when you need affection the most, he may not be rejecting you, but reflecting an internal pattern of yours. The difficulty of receiving affection when you need it most. He is not being cruel. He is being a mirror, showing you, through his behavior, something about your own relationship with intimacy and vulnerability. The mystical tradition that Eckhart represented taught that God speaks through everything, but that not everything can listen. Silence is the language of God, he wrote, and everything else is bad translation. Your cat is fluent in this original language. That's why he sometimes seems to be ignoring you when, in fact, he's hearing what you really want to say beneath what you actually say. There is a spiritual reason for the apparent feline indifference that goes far beyond personality traits or animal behavior. Cats function as living antennas of energetic dimensions that common human perception does not register. When your cat stares at an empty corner of the room, he may be detecting presences, residual memories, or simply energy fields that your rational mind has learned to ignore. Eckhart taught that to be present to God is to be present to what is, without filters, without judgments, without the need to transform the experience into something understandable. Your cat practices this radical presence constantly. He doesn't need to understand what he feels to feel it completely. He doesn't need to name what he perceives to be fully receptive to it. The irritation you sometimes feel with your cat's coldness may actually be irritation with your own inability to access this state of pure presence. He shows you, through silent example, what it is like to be completely available to reality without the need to control it, interpret it, or domesticate it. When the inner man and the outer man become one, wrote Eckhart, then you can hear God speaking in every creature. Your cat is already this unity. There is no gap between his interior and exterior. That's why he can function as a direct channel of information that arrives through non-verbal channels. He listens with his whole body. You listen only with your ears. This difference in perceptive capacity creates a communication abyss that you interpret as rejection, but that is only a difference in language. You speak in words. He listens in vibrations. You ask for attention through sounds. He offers attention through presence. You are trying to connect using completely different languages. Helena had suffered from chronic anxiety for years when midnight came into her life. During the most intense crises, she tried to call the cat to calm down, but he always did the same thing. He positioned himself a few meters away and simply watched. He didn't approach for comforting affection. He didn't offer the physical presence she desperately sought. He just stood there, motionless, with that penetrating gaze. Helena interpreted this as coldness, until the day she noticed a disturbing pattern. Midnight began to position himself at that specific distance about 20 minutes before the crises manifested, as if he felt something that she had not yet consciously registered, as if her anxiety emitted a frequency that he picked up even before she knew she was anxious. During a therapy session, Helena mentioned this behavior, and her therapist made an observation that changed everything. What if he's not walking away out of indifference, but positioning himself at the exact distance where he can help you without absorbing your anxiety? Helena realized that whenever she forced physical proximity during the crises, both she and Midnight became more agitated. When she respected the distance chosen by him, both calmed down more quickly. Michael was a writer and worked at home when Sage, his Persian cat, developed a habit that drove him crazy. Every time he sat down to write, she appeared, positioned herself between him and the computer, and stood there, staring at the screen as if she were reading. When he tried to remove her from there, she resisted. When he insisted, she left, but returned minutes later to repeat the ritual. Michael thought it was territorial behavior until he noticed that Sage only did this on specific days. Days when he was writing about heavy topics, death, trauma, existential pain. When he wrote light fiction or technical articles, she let him work in peace. But when he delved into dark emotional territories, she appeared as a silent censor. It took months for Michael to understand that Sage was not being inconvenient. She was serving as an energy regulator, absorbing through physical proximity part of the heavy emotional load that emanated from him during these writings. When he began to mentally thank her for her presence in those moments, instead of getting irritated, his writing became more fluid and less self-destructive. Rachel worked as a nurse and came home emotionally exhausted after difficult shifts. Luna, her Siamese cat, had a peculiar reaction on these occasions. Instead of offering affection as Rachel expected, Luna hid. She disappeared for hours. She only reappeared when Rachel had already processed the emotions of the day. Rachel felt rejected and abandoned precisely when she needed company the most. She even considered donating Luna because she interpreted this behavior as a lack of empathy, until a colleague who also had cats explained something that changed her perspective. Cats feel other people's emotions as if they were their own. When you arrive loaded with the pain of the patients, she needs to protect herself so as not to be consumed by feelings that are not hers. Rachel began to observe Luna more carefully and discovered that the cat always returned at the exact moment when she, Rachel, managed to disconnect energetically from work. As if Luna constantly monitored her emotional state and only approached when she detected that it was safe to make contact without being contaminated by energies that did not belong to her. David lived alone and developed depression after losing his job. On the darkest days, when he could barely get out of bed, he expected Felix, his Maine Coon cat, to offer the company he couldn't find in humans. But Felix did exactly the opposite. He disappeared. He spent the whole day invisible, only returning at night when David forced himself to eat something. David interpreted this as abandonment until he noticed a subtle pattern. Felix reappeared always in the moments when David made any movement towards self-care. Did he take a shower? Felix appeared. Did he prepare a meal? Felix materialized in the kitchen. Did he try to read a book? Felix appeared and settled nearby. The revelation came when David understood that Felix did not abandon him during the crises. He was creating an intentional vacuum that forced David to seek within himself the resources he sought externally. Felix only offered presence when he detected that David was truly available to receive it without using it as an escape from himself. Sarah had panic disorder, and Cosmos, her Persian cat, demonstrated a behavior that initially frightened her. Every time she was about to have a crisis, Cosmos positioned himself in front of the exit door, physically blocking her passage. Sarah interpreted this as aggression until she realized that Cosmos never scratched or attacked her. He just positioned himself as a silent barrier. During a particularly intense crisis, Sarah realized that whenever she managed to stay in the room with Cosmos blocking the exit, the crisis passed more quickly than when she managed to escape from home, as if the cat's physical presence anchored her in the present, preventing her from fleeing to external strategies that only prolonged her suffering. Remember the first time your cat looked at you like that? As if he saw something behind your eyes that you were trying to hide even from yourself? It wasn't judgment, it was recognition. He wasn't ignoring you. He was reading layers of you that hadn't yet reached your consciousness. True listening, Meister Eckhart taught the monks of Erfurt, happens when we stop imposing our will on what we want to hear and become completely receptive to what is being communicated. This was the essence of his contemplative practice, developing the ability to listen without an agenda, to be present without expectations, to receive information without trying to control it. Your cat naturally practices this form of radical listening. When he positions himself motionless in the middle of the room, apparently looking at nothing, he is performing what Eckhart called disarmed attention, a state of total receptivity that allows him to capture information that arrives through non-conventional channels. The mystical tradition that Eckhart represented taught that there are multiple layers of communication happening simultaneously in any environment. The layer of words and physical sounds was only the most superficial. Beneath it, vibrated, energetic, emotional, even telepathic dimensions that few beings developed sensitivity to access. Your cat possesses this sensitivity naturally. When you call for him and he doesn't answer, it may be because he has detected something in your energetic vibration that contradicts your words. You may be calling with affection, but emanating anxiety. You may be offering affection, but needing something in return. He feels this incongruence and chooses not to participate in an energetic exchange that is not authentic. Eckhart developed specific practices to cultivate this refined sensitivity. One of them was silent listening, sitting in total stillness and allowing information to arrive through non-verbal channels. During these practices, many monks reported experiences of direct communication with animals, plants, even inanimate objects. When you truly listen, Eckhart wrote, you listen not only with your ears, but with your whole being, and then you discover that everything is constantly communicating with everything. Your cat lives in this state of amplified communication. That's why he sometimes seems to be responding to things you haven't said, reacting to information you haven't consciously transmitted. There is a contemplative practice that can bring you closer to this feline capacity for multidimensional listening. It consists of sitting silently with your cat and simply being present, not trying to interact, not offering affection, not expecting a response. Just sharing the same space with total attention to the present moment. During these moments of shared presence, many people report experiences of telepathic communication with their cats, not hallucinations, but subtle perceptions of emotional states, intentions, even mental images that seem to come from the animal. Eckhart called these experiences union in listening, moments where the separation between observer and observed temporarily dissolves. The resistance you sometimes feel to your cat's apparent indifference may actually be resistance to your own ability to be present without an agenda. Your cat offers you, through example, the opportunity to practice love without expectations, presence without demands, connection without the need for control. God loves more the one who listens to him in silence than the one who speaks to him without stopping, Eckhart observed. Applied to the relationship with animals, this means that moments of shared silence can be more intimate and nourishing than constant attempts at physical or verbal interaction. When your cat walks away at the moment when you want proximity the most, he may be teaching you one of the deepest lessons of spirituality. That true love sometimes manifests through space, not proximity. Through respect for natural rhythms, not insistence on forced connection. The Eckhartian tradition teaches that each creature is word of God, a unique expression of universal consciousness. Your cat is constantly speaking this divine language through his presence, his movements, his choices of proximity and distance. Learning to read this language requires developing the same type of sensitivity that Eckhart cultivated through decades of contemplative practice. There is a reason why your cat sometimes chooses to position himself near you without allowing physical contact. He's offering pure presence, the kind of company that doesn't charge anything in return, that doesn't need to be reciprocated, that simply is. This is one of the most refined forms of love that exist, but that our culture centered on physical expression often does not recognize. The next time your cat seems to be ignoring you, try this Eckhartian practice. Instead of trying to attract his attention, simply observe what he is observing. Try to listen to what he is listening to. Allow yourself to enter the state of receptive attention that he naturally inhabits. During these moments, you may discover that your cat was not ignoring you. He was inviting you to a more subtle type of communion, one where communication happens not through words or gestures, but through shared conscious presence, where love is expressed not through demands met, but through the mutual capacity to simply be, without the need for anything else. Eckhart discovered that when he developed this capacity to be present without an agenda, his relationship not only with God, but with all creatures, was radically transformed. He stopped looking for spiritual experiences and began to recognize that every experience, when received with total attention, was already spiritual by nature. There is a story that Meister Eckhart's disciples preserved in secret, transmitting it only to those considered ready to understand its deepest mysteries. It tells of a cat who lived in the Erfurt convent and who behaved so peculiarly that he caught the attention of the German mystic himself. The cat always appeared during the hours of silent prayer. He did not seek affection from the monks. He did not ask for food. He did not disturb the sacred quiet. He simply positioned himself in the center of the chapel and remained motionless for hours, with his eyes half closed, in a posture that resembled that of the monks in deep meditation. Eckhart spent months observing this behavior until he understood something that forever transformed his relationship with animals. The cat was not only present during the prayers, he was praying, not with words or concepts, but with the totality of his being. He was practicing, naturally, what Eckhart taught as the highest degree of contemplation, silent union with the Absolute. "I learned more about prayer from that cat," Eckhart confided to a close disciple, "than with years of theological study. He taught me that the deepest communication with the divine happens when we stop trying to communicate and simply become receptive presence." This story reveals something fundamental about the nature of apparent feline indifference. It is not disinterest in the world or in people. It is interest so deep in reality that it manifests as constant contemplation. Your cat does not ignore you. He's constantly listening to dimensions of existence that your agitated mind cannot access. When he positions himself motionless in the middle of the room, looking at what seems to be empty, he is practicing what Eckhart called listening to the eternal in the temporal. He is attuned to frequencies that vibrate beneath the surface of common experience, frequencies that carry information about the energetic state of the environment, about the unexpressed emotions of the inhabitants of the house, about subtle presences that common perception does not register. You who sometimes feel rejected by your cat's coldness, who interpret his silence as indifference, who would like him to be more expressive, more affectionate, more available, perhaps you are missing the opportunity to recognize one of the greatest gifts that life can offer: the presence of a being who has naturally developed the ability to listen to what you have lost access to. Your cat does not ignore you. He listens to you from a place so deep that your rational mind cannot understand the nature of this listening. When you speak, he hears not only your words, but the anxiety behind them, the need that motivates them, the pain that you try to hide through the search for external connection. And sometimes, the most loving response he can offer is not to give you what you ask for, but to remain present while you learn to find within yourself what you seek outside. It is not cruelty, it is wisdom. The kind of wisdom that can only be offered by a being who lives naturally in the state that mystics spend their whole lives trying to achieve. The loneliness you sometimes feel in the presence of your cat may not be because he is absent. It may be because you are finally being confronted with your own presence without distractions, without the possibility of hiding through superficial interactions or demands met, face to face with the inner silence that has always been there, waiting to be listened to. Eckhart discovered that this confrontation with one's own silence was simultaneously the most terrifying and most liberating experience that a human being could have. Terrifying because it dissolves all constructed identities. Liberating because it reveals the vastness of consciousness that exists beneath these constructions. Your cat naturally lives in this vastness. That's why he can serve as a silent mirror, reflecting back to you the quality of presence that you bring to each moment. When you are agitated, he walks away. When you are authentic, he approaches. Not out of judgment, but out of natural resonance. The next time he seems to be ignoring you, remember Eckhart's words. Silence is where God speaks most clearly. Perhaps your cat is not ignoring you. Perhaps he is inviting you to listen to what he has always been trying to tell you through the language you have forgotten how to understand. The language of pure presence, where all communication happens without the need for words. He doesn't ignore you. He listens to you better than you listen to yourself, and sometimes the greatest act of love is to reflect back that listening until you also learn to hear what your soul has been whispering for so long. Like if you've ever felt that he listens to something you've lost. Comment if your cat's silence has ever taught you something about presence, and share with those who still believe that indifference and contemplation are the same thing.